Good afternoon. We're going to begin this afternoon with our guest, Anna Tostões. Anna is an architect with special work in architectural history and criticism. She's very well known in Portugal and abroad. She's full professor at Instituto Superior Técnico of Lisbon University, and where she leads the Architectonic Culture Research Group. In this condition, she is PI of the project Exchange Wars Visions between Africa, Europe, and Brazil, who produced a book called Modern Architecture in Angola and Mozambique, award by Fundação Calouste Gulbenkian. She also received an award by the 10th Bienal Ibero-Americana of Architecture and Urbanism, the prize of 2016, and she is now PI of a project called Cure and Care. It's a research on healthcare facilities, and all her work since the last years is organized in the perspective of the reuse and of the modern heritage. Anna have a long bibliography. She wrote a lot of books and articles. I don't go to enumerate it all here because it was too long, and just tell her to welcome to this session.
Thank you, Helena, and thank you to Modernisation organization, to all the team, to the leader, to all people. Not just because I'm very happy to be here, and I must say how I'm grateful to your invitation, but also because I really do believe that this research is something quite avant-garde. Rural landscapes and territories and matters and issues are normally not affairs of architects or of historians and so on. So I believe it's very welcomed, the brave work you apply to, and of course, as Docomomo president, I'm very happy to sustain and to help in what is possible. Let's see what we can do further together. But this is to say that you are the ones who know on the matter, not me. You are the ones who are researching, really, not us. We were talking 5 minutes ago, and I was saying, oh, there's no state of art of this matter. Of course, there are several diverse, but not a focused thing. And this is, in a way, the danger of your research, but at the other time is the challenge and what makes you, I would say, not powerful. It's not the world, not different at all, but means that it's necessary, this work. It's what I mean, finally. And so I would like to say that for this innovative research, I try to make a reflection, and that's why finally I thought about this idea of a concept of paradox concerning modernity and modern movement and all the industrial development connected with modern movement and the rural realm. We all know that, in a way, modern movement, at least in architecture, is connected mainly with the answer to a world in transformation and going through a kind of industrial transformation. And so let's say the iconic or the utopian perhaps not so much utopian answers, were this kind of manifestos from architects, from people connected with image and with design and the drawing. But I think it's important, and I would like to bring once again this book. Every one of us know it from '82. And it was a work that I think Bershon Berman cared for 10 years to finally finish the book in '81. All that is solid melts into air, which was in the '80s, I think, one of the most powerful discussion on the process of modernity. Marshall Berman took the political and social revolutions of the 19th century, or perhaps the 18th century. We talk about the Industrial Revolution, about the French Revolution, so in a way the end of the Ancien Régime in the Western world, and quoting writings from Goethe, Faust, Marx, Dostoevsky, and others, and let's say, thinking about the creation of new environments to replace the old situation. And it's fantastic in a way how Marshall Berman was able to pick up this phrase in the middle of the Communist Manifesto, which means that everything is changing, even what is material today, it's going to dissolute. So it's in a kind of a physical dissolution process. And I think that when we talk about industry, sometimes we could, let's say, make the error to think that this is something from the contemporary age. Of course, it is not. Industry, as always, being in the life of humanity or mankind. The thing of the shift of the 19th century, the contemporary era, it's the speedy, it's the way things transform in such a fast way that it's impossible to be there all the time. And that's why this image, this kind of metaphor from Marx, it's so eloquent. I would say even today, but I would say exactly today, because as we know, we are going through another revolution in this time. It's perhaps not anymore industrial, but it's a communication revolution with an incredible speed. So it's time to look to material, to the earth, to the land, perhaps to the moon too. And that's why this paradox, I think, the modern rural landscape. So you are daring and you are making something really brave to address this issue. So what is a modern rural landscape? I believe I would prefer to think about ways of life, perhaps anthropology, even being architect, but I would say could be so important to understand how people deal with life, and that's why it was very, very challenging the last session I assist with some interviews with people and so on, rather than our, let's say, historical, architectural, canonic addressing images, designs, if it's modern or if it's traditional. This is another thing. What matters on modernity, it's the way of living and how in a rural environment, it's, of course, possible to modernize, but it has to do with an incredible amount of questions, namely with ownership, who is the owner of the land. It's very interesting because in your project, in a way, there's a kind of periphery of Europe. So Portugal, Italy, I'm sorry, the Roman Empire, you are the center of the world, but nowadays we still in a way, this is the culture of the Mediterranean, and Greece. So it's a different Europe, I would say, a culture of the olive, a culture of the bread, a culture of the wine, with a different attitude also concerning daily life. So I will propose to make some points and to try to share my doubts, my questions on this matter. So the transformation of the territory, of course, got a huge modification the last 100 years or even 200 years. The mobility, the transportation is in fact a reality, and indeed is this reality that nowadays, with the communication and technological revolution, is coming to a different point. We are sure that in 10, 20 years things are going to be different because the transportation, the mobility could be immaterial. And it's very curious to realize that the question, let's say the approaching of the industrial world was, let's say, or had a kind of answer, not just to topic, perhaps something really useful and eloquent. And the curious thing is, of course, that this answer, I would say, came exactly from United Kingdom, where the industrialization started with some speedy in a kind of divided collectivity or divided nation, the ones who wanted the progress and the ones who wanted to keep with the natural balance. And so I think we should look to this schema of Ebenezer Howard, and it's so nice to see how this kind of conceptual structure is keep on going, even the rural settlements. And of course, this idea of the garden city was to suppose that could be a today different from the industrial terrible yesterday, and even it was possible to make a future for all mankind different. And the idea of, let's say, a controlled growth, which is not new. We all know that Plato, he had this idea, and in Greece system, the colonies were in fact the result of a city who was not anymore affordable for democracy, and so the colony had to be found, to be launched, and Mr. Howard thought the same. So this kind of little village or new towns, or let's say something controlled between heart and different settlements with a green belt around separating them, of course. But one other question I believe it's important to quote is the question on the city. In a way, it's recognized. You talk about Amos Oz in the morning, or yesterday, I'm sorry. But namely, the city is known as the place of exchanging knowledge. And perhaps that's the reason we should ask why people leave the rural areas and want to come to the city. Why? Why it's not the opposite? Only when there's crisis, there are some little waves of this. But this is not common. The city is really the very attractive place, the place where the encounters are, the knowledge, That's why I think it's very, very metaphoric, this School of Athens from Raphael. And also this idea, very Quattrocento from Italy, of the ideal city, and also from Italy, which is in a way the great place. I would not say the nation, because this is a little bit irregular to call a nation. All this sense of the Ambrogio Lorenzetti, this idea of the good and bad government. And this balance, it's a balance, of course, between the city and the rural environment. And once again from Italy, I'm sorry, I didn't realize when I put this image that I was making a kind of praise to Italy. Also, the place where the industry was, in a way, shown as a utopia from the most radical futurists. But so, this, in a way, it's the idea of city where people can live and, let's say, maximize their qualities. And why not making this in a rural environment? And the funny thing, and that's why I thought I should also quote Camille Lucid. We saw this morning several urban rural settlements, or some rural urban settlements. And the funny thing is that, of course, in a way, they repeat this principle of the piazza or the Rossio or the place of the encounter, which is finally the same principle of a kind of Western organic city, which was in fact fixed in this end of the 19th century. And from the same time, so 19th century, I think it's really a source for the research. Of course, the housing question from Engels, which is linked with the rural and the urban, and of course, an homage to Sir Patrick Geddes and how he kept the Le Place trial with the place, the work, and the folk. Now, I would like to ask you just to look to some forms, now let's be a little bit architects on this, of new towns, of new settlements, and as we don't have time for everything, in this image I would like to enlighten Tel Aviv concept, which is very, 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 very interesting, because as you know, the philosophy and the main strategy is conceived by Patrick Geddes, who is not an architect, but he thought how to make this new town, and perhaps it's the first new town of the 20th century, Tel Aviv, without making the drawings. So the design is not from him. This is very, very, very interesting. But of course, Geddes was balancing this question of nature and construction, I would say. And following all these movements from Scotland, from UK, French answers, I will quote here Suresnes, or perhaps we could see Redburn, that it was presented yesterday, or even some fisherman settlements, and of course the new towns, or I would say the new village after the World War II, made or conceived in England or in Britain, as they say, the Britain experience. And it's amazing because, in fact, the idea is to bring to some kind of urban settlements the reality of the rural environment. And this is something, let's say, this kind of types that were already, let's say, developed during the Weimar Republic, experimenting new ways of, let's say, organizing housing, here following in a way, I would say, a mix from Garden City and the big, how do you say in German, the big central area of a village, and this is the center of the thing. And also in the several new towns around Frankfurt, made under the leadership of Ernest May, with several different typologies of 2 stories, some higher, like a kind of a building with some facilities, but anyway, made as a, let's say, answer to the new industrial world, trying to balance these 2 values, the nature and the artificial construction in the way. And of course, after the World War II, the reconstruction changed, I would say, completely the shift, and in a way the Athens chart, let's say, known as, let's say, the modern chart of the urbanism, which I really disagree. I don't agree with this idea. And yesterday, Louise Mumford was very well presented in the lecture on broadacrocity and all the regional planning. And we all know that Siegfried Gideon and José Luis Sert wanted to publish the Athens chart, and they went talking with Louise Mumford. He said, "Oh no, please don't do it. This is from criminals and assassins." Okay, but of course, Le Corbusier he published as his own, let's say, concept. But this is to arrive to this idea that the high rise, it's the solution for housing in urban context as well in rural context. And we are going to see how this kind of system used mainly at the beginning for offices and, let's say, the heart of cities like Chicago, for instance, is going to be replied for housing with, of course, incredible results, because it's a multiplication of inhabitants in a very short area occupied. And the curious thing is that it's the fact that for, let's say, some, I would say, rural inhabitants to live in a tower, it's the symbol, or it was the symbol of some high level of social status. I will talk about this at a little bit at the end. But so, this is to say that this spread on this kind of green areas with these big blocks occurred, we'll say, everywhere, with very, very, very high quality projects, the case of Tapiola, or the case of Olivais, or the case of Portales in Chile, or, and this is one of the focus you are looking for, I mean Lansdcapes team, in the Soviet area and Soviet nation. And this is absolutely incredible in a way how some, let's say, high and a kind of mega structures are built to solve immediate housing questions in areas where the economy is based on agriculture, because this is why we are talking about this. And these are some fantastic images of this kind of development, very, very fast in a way, and showing systems of prefabrication and a kind of, I would say, if I may, a kind of an anti-nature typology answer. Of course, this is a big discussion because there was a huge housing problem, and perhaps this was in fact the solution for giving some comfort and some quality of life to people. So perhaps this is a discussion for Modscapes, the typology, if this amount of people connecting in the same, let's say, housing unit, or the other solution with the low rise. And following these experiences, which were started before the Second World War and then keep on, the big mega structures, which are developed mainly during the 60s, has a kind of, let's say, a construction. It's not a building, it's a construction, which is at the same time an infrastructure. So could be the Utopia from Le Corbusier in Rio de Janeiro, with the highway and with the supermarket and with the train and with all of these things. And in fact, this was conceived in first way or first thoughts by the Japanese team called Metabolists, who, let's say, launched themselves with a name in the World Design Conference in 16 in Tokyo. And of course, we are talking about a country or a nation who disappeared in a way after the war and needed to reconstruct. And in 10 years, Japan was rebuilt and was, let's say, giving up of its rural tradition and, let's say, approaching incredible ideas of new village, new towns, with this kind of artificial way of inhabiting the Earth or the planet, with these systems of capsules and so on. And at the same time, we would say, or perhaps a little bit 5 years before, some of the ideas developed following the Garden City program were recalled. And here, with a kind of a layout, I would say, more Corbusian, I would say. And this is one of the settlements of the river occupation of Douro in Portugal, with all the dams constructed. It was 5 dams in this area. And this is the design for the village, for the families, the technicians, etc. And an aspect of the ensemble with the little supermarket, the chapel, the houses, let's say. A kind of a new town in the middle of the landscape, supporting a dam of the Douro River. But also some research was done in these years of critique of the modern movement, let's say, a radical answer and connecting with some local and regional issues. And this is another example in a, let's say, rural landscape, how to, let's say, propose housing when the first idea, and I would say the government wanted to have towers, and the architects were able to discuss and to show that the big high-rise from the ones we saw in the Soviet area, that this answer, I would say, more organic and at least lower. And with this relation, it's important, I believe, also the relation that people can have with the earth. I mean, to have a door that communicates with the, let's say, the landscape, and not having these kind of incredible systems of circulation that a tower or a megastructure implies. And in this field, I would recall, and we had a very nice presentation of a paper this morning also, and this is one of the issues you are dealing with, the poblados de colonización. So this is a program carried both by Portugal and Spain, but mainly in Spain, or in Spain with a large scale, I would say, and a large scale because it is a huge territory, of course, and also because it's Spain is a huge territory with a kind of a heart, with no inhabitants. A heart, I would say, Extremadura, all the great areas of Andalusia. Andalusia, it's quite the size of Portugal, for instance, just to have an idea, which were, in fact, mainly latifundio as ownership. So big fincas, big farms with just one owner. And the Franco dictatorship was able to reclaim and to expropriate these areas. And in fact, there was a kind of a comprehensive system following the rivers, valleys, but also a kind of intensive agriculture, I would say, for olives, for instance, of oranges, or cereals. And it was, in fact, a fantastic challenge, I believe, for the modern architects. How to, so I think the best project or the best command an architect may have as a child is to make a city or to make a village. So they were quite lucky, and here we are looking to one designed by José Fernando del Amo in Alicante, so really in the south. And it's interesting. I don't know if I have here. Yeah. No. I think doesn't work, but don't worry. So we are talking about, once again, an organization that, in my point of view, keeps some of the Camilo City patterns, which are not from Camilo City, of course. It's his analysis of, let's say, Western cities or villages, but so the communal place, the place for the water, which is very important. You can imagine Alicante. So in a way, this is the place where women would wash and would, let's say, being in community, talking every day, so on. The same for the church or the communal center. So this kind of new villages or colonization villages, if I may translate for English, were almost, and they were lots of hundred, thought around a big center with an area of facilities, and this is quite similar to what Axel present, I think, in the kibbutz, no? The house, and there was a little private area. Of course, in the kibbutz, I think it was longer. But this principle that each family, which is the base of this system, it's the family who owns the house, who has the little plot to plant what they want, and afterwards, beyond, there's the great area of rural territory to plant. This is another one. Here they are more sophisticated. These ones in the 60s, I think they start in 39, the constitution of the, let's say, the program. In 53, there was quite interesting ones, and the model is going to evolve. And here, I think it's quite a very sophisticated one, you see, with this piazza and this very geometric. We architects, we love these things, and we hope people would love to live there, which I think so. And as far as I know, it's a matter which has been recalled nowadays. We were discussing that recently in the school of Navarra in Pamplona. Students were dealing with the reuse of some of these new villages. So let's say a kind of reflect of the crisis, the idea to coming back to these areas, perhaps in a more modern way, I would say, perhaps more individual, or which I think it's a great difference between an urban environment and a rural one, which is in the urban life, in a kind of radical individualism. It's quite the way to survive. Although in a rural settlement, it's really necessary to have a collective and a community force. And I believe these approaches to this low rise and a kind of low density too have to do with something that occurred at least in the 30s till the 60s in all these countries, which is let's say the way and the necessity that architects felt to look to some kind of vernacular architecture or popular architecture or regional settlements. And this is the appeal, the plea from one of the Portuguese architects really asking for looking to that. And in fact, this was possible to be done in Portugal in 55, so a survey on regional architecture. And so 12 architects went organizing groups and went to all the areas to see with their, I would say, modern movement eyes, how the life occurred in these places, in these villages, which at the time were still with people, which is not anymore. And that's why your project is very, very important, at least for Portugal, I think. So it's very diverse the way they approach. We usually say that in the north and in the northeast there was a team much more connected with, let's say, anthropologic analysis, So to understand the village, but not just architecture, to understand what was the plantation, what was the richness of the village, how they organize, and so on. In other areas, architects were, I would say, more narrow and just look at construction, materials, system of construction, and a kind of more, let's say, distant and dry approach. Anyway, this was, in fact, very important, at least because in 10 years these villages will be abandoned, because the great immigration starts exactly in the 60s, because of the colonial war in a way, and because of the fact that to live in rural settlements or in a village, it was really to be poor and to have nothing and to don't have possibility of having what we may say at the time a better life. This kind of research were a little bit everywhere. I should refer the one from Pagano and Daniel, also in 36 in Italy. Here, the Trulli di Alberobello, I think. And what I think it's relevant also is that this matter, it's going to come into the CEAMs. So in the CEAMs after the war, they are really different and they are approaching, let's say, another way of seeing things. So the core of the city, the importance of vernacular architecture, and for instance here with this Moroccan group, the vernacular, it's everything because it's slums too. So they were really approaching the question of housing, how people could live, and the question, the big name or the manifesto was habitat, and all the group wanted to make as they had made, I would say, between commas, in 33, the Athens chart. The idea was to make the habitat chart. It was never done. As we know, the discussion starts even with the etymology. So what's the meaning of habitat in Anglo-Saxonic languages, habitat in Latin language, and big discussions and so on, and so no chart of habitat. But anyway, the discussion was there, and for the first time, the CEAMs, so the very clean, I would say, modern movement people with the pilotis and so on, were approaching bidonvilles and, you know, North Africa and different, and realizing that the world was not just this hygienic or so, I would say, cleaning development area, and this was not just one future. And of course, we think it's important also to look to the representation of Portugal in the last CEAM, the one of Dubrovnik, and it's very, very curious, I believe, because you can see here, this is the Portuguese territory. We are in the northeast here, Trás-os-Montes. It's possible to see here the big Douro River, the same river where the dams were built and the former village we saw. But here, the architects or the group CEAM from Porto, they are proposing a kind of a structure like the one of Howard, finally. So linking in a kind of a star, systems of villages, and finally proposing a design for people to live. The ones who were in the this place in the morning, there was a very, very interesting presentation presented by Alexandre, but of all the team of ESAP, which was really discussing this and the organization of the house. It's not my goal now. It's just to realize that architects, and I would say modern architects, Viana de Lima, he was the leader of this group, and he was really a really Corbusian, were, you know, getting organic and approaching to real problems. And so this idea, I will read in French, why not? pour une charte de l'habitat, on ne peut pas refuser la... I can't read. You may read. Where is the... La garantie de survivance. The guarantee of surviving. Des habitudes positives au-delà de la diffusion de nouvelles habitudes. Donc, absolutely open. I think this is a kind of a manifesto with not a very clear French, but I believe we understand what they want. And don't forget here, the little pig with the man, they are sleeping because it was normal. So in a way, no, it was. Okay, I know, pigs down and men up. Okay, okay. But this is, of course, metaphoric and kind of a cartoon to show that it was possible to be happy and to live with comfort, I would say with contemporary comfort, even in the villages. Of course, I should have made a big contextualization saying that Portugal, we lived in a dictatorship, and our dictatorship were based on an agriculture development, financial, economical system. This is really important. Our dictator only allowed to have an industry minister in 1943. So till then, no dams, no electricity, no nothing, because the idea is to keep living on the 19th century. You know, with the society very, very well balanced between rich and poor, and it's okay. The poor go to the church and they don't know how to read, that they don't need because they don't have time, to read. So this stabilized kind of, I'm exaggerating, but it was, in a way, this thing. And so this is to say that our rural settlements were kept till a kind of limit of living in. It's curious to realize that this presentation of the rural is simultaneous to all the Team 10 and I would say the Van Eyck and Smithson's and Sterling presentations at the same time. And very, very soon we are going to see in 1964 the Rudowski at the MoMA, which is always, you know, a trendy thing to be in the MoMA. It means that, of course, it attains, you know, some prestigious, all these things. The architecture without architects. It's going to. So this is a kind of a movement. And so I would say that these searches concerning let's say, rural settlements or settlements for historians, I would say places without history, in a way, or without chronology, were, let's say, very fascinating for academic people and architects. And in the 80s, for instance, quite late, I would say, a comprehensive survey on some 9 islands in the middle of the Atlantic, in between Europe and United States, were, let's say, analyzed. And I'm sure that what we found there in 81 was quite the same that our colleagues in 55 found in the, I would say, the continent. So these are some plantations, quite loose, this kind of beautiful landscapes, really precious. Of course, islands are very peculiar. And we study, and I believe this was quite important, systems of, or typological systems of houses, adding the question of the system of povoamento, of settlement, the system of settlement, always together. So, of course, we profit from the work of our, of the beginnings of the 50s, and we try to fix this kind of world quite lost you know, in the middle of the Atlantic, but still in working and still at the moment with people, but not for such a long time. Not for such a long time. For instance, this is a quite far away island in Graciosa, and in this island we found just old people and the youngs with problems. All the other went to New Jersey, knew something in United States, so great immigration from here to there. So the question is, how can we reflect on keeping on living in these places? Could be for romantic reasons, I don't know. A great friend of his, photographer, Antonio Sena, he lives in Pico for 30 years and he's still there with a fantastic archive of photography, but it's just exotic cases. Because what we assist now there, it's of course an incredible transformation due to tourism. As Pedro Vieira de Almeida always said, the most pollutant industry, if we realize tourism as an industry. Okay, I will finish very quickly. So, I think there was some other answers, and of course I must quote all these people from the 70s, Turner and so on, and the PREVI, the Proyecto Experimental de Vivienda, housing experimental project, yes. It was a fantastic program conducted by Fernando Belaúnde, the president of Peru, and who asked the United Nations Habitat, and Peter Land came by this path, and there was a huge competition to all architects, let's say, I think 20 groups, and some of this was done, and this was done in fact to try to find an answer to all these slums, because this is a question too. And these people live with different systems of economy, agriculture, commerce, arts and crafts, all of these things. And in fact, the part was done, and it's very fun, for instance, to see that one of the metabolists, really, how they change in context. So it's Maki, he was one of the founder of the metabolists, and for Previ, he just proposed a system of housing evoluting, so with auto construction. And just to finish, I can't resist to show you when our dictatorship was finished. We had a revolution, so no more empire, no more colonies, no more war, but lots of slums in our country. And this is an interesting case, I think, conducted near, it's a rural settlement, but near the sea in Setúbal. And it was like this, the place where people lived. And a very, very interesting and useful work was done by an architect, in the case Birne, Gonçalo Birne, with a sociologist. He always told me that she was absolutely precious. Without her, nothing what could happen, because here the question was how to solve this area and to find, let's say, comfort houses for the people who lived in the slum, denying, in a way, that's what they wanted, the block idea or the tower idea. And the architects and the sociologists with these kind of interviews, house to house, people to people, family to family, they were able to, in fact, I think I may be fair to say a participatory process. And if the government, who was paying the houses or a part of it, or the land, wanted a program of this high rise, the architects with the population were able to resist and to show that in this area and with this slope, the answer should be let's say, like this, to adapt to the slope, to create some little patios and so on. And I'm finishing with something which I think it's very special, which is the Ciudad Abierta, a kind of crazy contracultura, how do you say, against culture? No, contracultura. Contraculture. Led by some, I would say, academics, professors from a Chilean university who decided to leave the city and to make a kind of a community for creation, for a kind of, with the aim of being auto-sustainable. So don't need to have money or other dirty things. They could live like this and then make the party or the fiesta every day. Thank you so much for your patience. I think we still have some minutes if there's any question. You need a microphone.
I'm a really bad share. I forgot some important things to say about our speaker. She's president of Docomomo, and she did edit almost 40 Docomomo journals. 18. I'm sorry, 18. Yeah, 18 Docomomo journals. And she participated in two very important surveys in Portugal, one in the vernacular architecture of Azores and the other of the modern 20th century Portuguese architecture. Okay. So I don't know if someone...
So I have a tremendous responsibility, that's the point.
So I don't know if someone want to put some question, because I have some questions to put. What?
Please break the ice.
Okay. Okay.
Ice. Not ice.
Okay. I had my question there, but I would like to know, I would like to understand better the relation with your experience of the surveys and all that, and your knowledge of our architecture, and how do you connect this question? I don't know. I would like to listen a little more about the connection between the rural experience and all this revolutionary experience with just with
this one is
yeah.
Okay. Like this revolution. No, you stay here with me, please. Don't leave me now. I think they are really, really different in a way. I would say, perhaps I'm going to be cynic, but this is quite exotic. Of course, this is a transgression. Crazy people. In the end of the 60s, 71, who left everything and wanted to have a new life. Finally, they thought that it was possible to make their own life as they wanted. This was first before Pinochet. And the rural world, the one I lived, was really different because I would say that in Açores, people were proud of being there. Some of them, yes. They were proud of the landscape. They were proud of the place, the quality of the products, for instance. They were aware of the quality of life they had, even if they don't have such a comfort as the urban people. I think in a way this was very, very important. The problem was the new generation. The new generation who had, in Açores, it's the American deal, the American appeal. And so it's normal that they immigrate a lot because we live in a consummation society, so it's sometimes hard to convince young people to stay without having all these stuffs. I don't know. It's a question. I was very happy to see Amos Oz in a kibbutz. It's very curious. And for instance, I knew recently that one of the director of our National Library in Lisbon, he was born in a very faraway village, and he started reading with the Gulbenkian system of trucks. Yeah. Because for us, the rural landscape was the illiteracy. People had no books. There was no schools, or if there was, not so. Sometimes were some, how do you say, unique attempts. Someone like you, for instance, you make a school for the people around your village, things like that. But so my experience with the real, let's say, vernacular, the real rural, was, but the source it's different in a way, because you have lots of sea, you have boats, and there's, let's say, amusement in a way.
Yeah, but what I just remember what I had in my notes there. It's sometimes I think that there are a part of Portugal very well conserved, fantastica, like Alentejo, and it's not destroyed. It have no interventions for.
And people are proud.
Yeah, but because
this is very important, to be proud of our place.
The truth is, isn't it true? Isn't it Alentejo conserved because it was very poor and have no money to do all that things that the people in the north that go to abroad and come back with money and destroy everything around them?
Yes, perhaps, but I think Alentejo people think differently because they are very calm and they think, no, this is true.
This is a Portuguese joke.
Oh, no, this is true. Oh, we have a regional discussion, I'm sorry. In a way, they know that this life has a value. Their food has a value. It's a slow food, very poor one, with a kind of an herb and water. You can make something. Always. You go to the garden and you take things and you make a fantastic soup. They know that it's possible to survive this, and it's not necessary to have all these troubles to live in the big city. Oh, this is terrible, in a way.
Victoria? Well, I don't know. Someone want to ask something?
Yes, it's a very precise question. It's about the CEAA project, which you showed.
Sorry,
the CEAA project.
The CEAA.
I believe that architects that did these projects in 1975 had the opportunity, the chance to participate in the surveys. Is it true? I mean, they had time before the revolution to think about architecture and to think about rural architecture because they were to participate in the surveys. Is it true, like Bern and CEAA and people like that?
I would say that this new generation, the generation of CEAA and Bern and so on, they didn't participate directly in the survey, but they were, let's say, the sons of the guys of the survey. And there was a kind of intellectual continuity with the people, and the group of architects were quite little, so they knew all each other. And in fact, they had this discussion, for instance, concerning what to do in some context. I mean, the belief that it was not, let's say, acceptable to make different typologies in the middle of the landscape, for instance. Not just because of the, let's say, the object, the materiality, but also because of the life that this system will bring or oblige people to. In a way, I think so. And anyway, during the SAL means, I cannot translate, Serviço de Apoio Ambulatório Local, local ambulatory support service, something like that. It was created after the revolution. with the aim to solve the housing problem. It was a huge one. People dying with floods, things incredible. So it was really a need, and architects were committed with a better future, I think, and not just as an image of doing fantastic drawings. No, committed with people. And in fact, during the process of design and conception, there was surveys and big discussions with the people, some with good results, other ones with not so good results. For instance, one of the, I would say, the master of Birn, Nuno Tony Pereira, which was the guy who made the Barcelos thing, he had a command with a group in Alentejo, exactly, a group of people who needed to transform the slums in house, and he proposed something with low rise, and the guy says, oh no, we want a tower, we are not less than the guys in the city, we want to be, upgraded for them, and they have a discussion, and Teutonia never did it. It was like this.
Hello, I'm sorry. It's really a yes or no question, but I wanted to know if, do you believe that still nowadays this gaze toward the vernacular, let's say, is still at the core of Portuguese way of conceiving architecture, or has it faded?
Failed? No. If it is still, perhaps. Sorry. No, I think so. I was thinking, for instance, about Manuel Aires Mateus. He has several houses, even his little own house, his summer house in Alentejo, and it's completely vernacular. He just occupied the thing. So he kept, the materiality and the things. I would say without, I don't know, but there's more Portuguese here, and perhaps we can have a big discussion. But I think in a way, of course, it's an erudite approach, always. But we always work in connection with what is around us. So it's not mimetic, of course. But I would say there's a kind of a pleasure admiring some of these beautiful things, I think so.
Just a small question, or perhaps rather a comment. You put a lot of wood on the fire with this presentation.
I'm sorry, but it was my job.
No, it's stimulating it somehow. I did, however, focused my attention on one constant topic that goes quite across your presentation. That is the question of surveys. I would say that there is a kind of stream of interest and concern throughout the 20th century among planners and architects for the use of surveys as a preliminary to any kind of action or proposal of change. And this goes back at least to Geddes for a start, and then finds different variations through time. Now, the comment is, first, this clearly denotes that these experts were so ignorant of what the rural situation was that they needed a survey. Meaning that they were definitely not rurals, but urbanites. And I think this is quite an important thing to put in our own minds. It's again, it starts from an urban gaze on the rural sphere. Okay, and it's trying to bridge that gap that puts surveys as being so important. The other thing is that, at least for Geddes, which was nothing but an architect or a planner even, he was trained as a biologist, a philosopher, whatever you'd like, but he came from the social and life sciences. his concern was really, okay, how do people live? What are their real problems? Let's try to identify the needs. Let's not project our own ambitions or wishes, and so on. So there was this attempt to be as close as possible to the immediate needs. And I think this is quite inspirational and important. What is striking is that you see a number of surveys on vernacular architecture by architects, mainly campaigns of photographies, which are very stimulating, very inspiring, but you hardly see the farmers.
It's an image.
You hardly see the people, and you ask yourself, what do they get back from that? I think that the small, how do you say in English, caricature, the comic sketch on the Portuguese CEAA group's proposal, there was one which you didn't comment on, but that was the position of the architect.
Do you want to go there?
Yeah, I think that's just interesting to think about again. That's here, the more or less central left, the position of the architect, understanding, identification, humility.
Yes, it's this thing. And here you have these two, money and research. It's very fun, these drawings. This one is great. Identification, anyway, you know, you see he's in the...
So there's a kind of understanding, at least, that these people, and that was quite common in the 50s,
and look this,
that
great.
The expert knowledge is not necessarily better or more informed or more wise than other knowledges. And I guess, yeah. So I think this is an important issue to keep in mind. In looking at all the different experiments we're looking at, and probably we'd need to add a chapter after the 70s on how this relationship between the expert and the final user evolved. I think we're getting much more closer to something that is both scientifically valid and morally acceptable. I think here we're still, after humility at the end, after all, yet delivering a final product that is not exactly fitting the needs of the final user. But anyway.
But this must be the position of an architect. We never know if you are answering. And times go and change.
The drawing also closed now.
Oh, I was thinking something to say. The survey, it's a kind of state of art, I think. You know, to keep balance, to break the ice, to use your words. So thank you.